Hi, everybody. Welcome to my podcast, Bridging the Gap, Real Estate for Women. As a woman in real estate, I know firsthand that women are underrepresented and still tentatively venturing into real estate investing. While that is slowly changing, my goal is to propel it forward. We can do this. I'm Tara Twersky, an attorney and real estate sponsor and investor from New York City. And I'm so happy to be here today with Hanna Osundina, all the way from the UK. Hanna is the founder of BWRE, which is an acronym for Black Women in Real Estate. Hanna started BWRE as a way to connect with other Black women in the property industry as she struggled to find women like herself in her immediate network. She is passionate about racial and gender equality and hopes the group will help Black women connect and support with one another. Hanna, it's great to have you here. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much, Tara. It's great to meet you and to be on the podcast.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you. I love what you're doing because I think in general, there's a shortage of women in the field of real estate, but you've kind of niched it even a step further in what you're doing. And I'm curious as to what was really the impetus for this and how did you get involved in this and what made you decide, hey, I want to do a group for Black women and women?
I got to a level in my career where, I was looking around and there weren't many Black women in the industry that were in my immediate network day to day or even above me or coming in beneath me. And I started to have a sense of isolation generally about like what the makeup of the industry was and where I fit into it. So at that point, I was working on a project on the Olympic Park. It was, 2,000 homes in East London. Yes, yeah. So East London, for people that might know, is like extremely diverse. It's majority ethnic minorities, but London as a city is actually 45% ethnic minorities. But the team of people who are sitting around designing new neighborhoods, regenerating what are typically like areas of lower socioeconomic background, and so that's where typically the ethnic minorities are. So the teams of people designing it, making decisions, changing it, typically don't look like the communities that they're coming in to change, and they don't know necessarily always how to connect with those communities. And I just found myself being slightly frustrated by the continued like lack of representation that I was finding in my team and in the consultants that I was appointed to do these projects. And I just got to a point I was like, I want to meet other Black women. I want to see where these ladies are. There must be more. So I went on LinkedIn and I did a LinkedIn stalk. And I found like
yeah. It really knocks it up for professional people, I believe. I said like LinkedIn is like notches everything up.
Yes.
It's like a conference all the time. You can like be midnight in your pajamas at a conference.
Honestly, like I love LinkedIn for that. There's so much to learn, so many people to connect with, and so much like amazing industry news. But it was like, for me, it was the tool to find other people who looked like me and other Black women in the industry. And so I invited them for dinner, and that's where it started. And so we started meeting regularly, and it became that I like to say the anecdote to the white male club, where women in the industry now had other women that they could connect with, other women that they could speak to, call on, ask for careers advice, ask for support with their professional qualifications, and really create a sisterhood out of that. And it's grown. Last week we actually did a campaign called I Am Women, where we highlighted 5 Black women in the industry and part of the Black women in real estate. We spoke about their stories, their journeys as to how they got into the industry and what they're doing now. And it's had such a powerful response from the industry so far, because so often these stories aren't highlighted, these stories aren't discussed, and we're pulled out, like, Black women typically are pulled out for their diversity as women and Black and their intersectionality, and less so for just the fact that they're amazing professionals who are smashing it day to day. So it's been amazing to be able to do that as well.
I think that's great. And I think that we can't lose sight of the fact that when we're building, when we're in the field of real estate, we're really building community and homes, right? women are at the heart of the home. I mean, that's just the way it is. And so to not include women and Black women in this conversation in a real way, but to have men be, architects and designers and setting up everything without the women having a say and a voice and a vision is really missing so much of what really needs to be done. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, like I think it's so important to remember representation matters, but also like people, diversity of thought and diversity of perspective really does matter. And it's really impossible to design a well thought out space for and communities for everyone when it's only coming from one type of person and or one type of socioeconomic group. It really does require so many different types of voices, so many different types of diversity to sit around the table and allow those perspectives of how the spaces and buildings and homes will be used, because that's how you get to better buildings and better communities. And communities impact so much more than just the built space. It impacts wellness, mental health, it impacts access to jobs, it impacts the environment. And so we need to be really considerate about how we are going about delivering these, and who's around the table to help us consider all of the facets of as to what we're impacting in society.
Yeah, absolutely. So you sit on a community local, am I correct?
I was on the board of E16 CLT, which is a community-led housing company. And so effectively, it's a group of local people within the community lobbying for land from the local authority to deliver community-led housing. And so what that means is that the community will deliver the homes for themselves and then rent it out or sell it to people in the local community at affordable prices. Because in the UK, typically local authorities up until recently lost their powers to deliver homes. And so you have the likes of large-scale developers coming in to deliver some of it as affordable and the rest private sale. But in that, a lot of the people are displaced in the communities. And so the groups like the E16 CLT and others in London have been provided with grant from the Greater London Authority to help deliver community-led developments. And so the idea is to really make sure that there's space within the communities that people are living in for them to still stay there through this group. I mean, the scale isn't there yet, but I think the premise and the ideology around it is really important to make sure that the people who want to stay in their communities aren't priced out.
Yes, I think that is important. And I think everything takes time, right? It doesn't, you have to have staying power, right? And you have to and really stick to something in order to see it through and to see it grow, because that's a lot of fortitude. So tell me, if we could back up a bit to how you really began in this industry.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I do now because I'm still getting used to the title of entrepreneur. So I'm a managing director and founder of Mood and Space, which is a development consultancy. So I focus on community first and social value in the development process. And historically, I've worked on large regeneration projects. So before I left to set up my own business, I was working at Balfour Beatty, which is a large infrastructure company. So it's one of the largest in the UK, and they have some branches in the US. They're the company doing the LAX, the airport regeneration project. So on that, while working there, I was working on, and I mentioned it before, the Olympic Park, where it was 2,000 new homes, 2 new neighborhoods, like commercial, non-residential floor space, new parks, and it kind of like I've been building up to that, and then intend to hopefully deliver more at a bigger scale. And so prior to that, I was working again in East London on another regeneration project, which was 1,000 homes across 5 phases. It was a town centre led regeneration, so it was majority commercial spaces. And, you know, we had like anchor units and a consideration of build to rent and extra care, so senior living homes, as well as affordable. And then prior to that, I was working on another regeneration project in Elephant and Castle, as well as working on a couple of other delivery projects between all of those through the lifespan of my career. But generally now, what I really just would love to do is continue to take all the learning I've had on working on large scale regeneration projects in inner city London and help people deliver their projects with a community first approach and really deliver social value and see how we can bed in and weave in into existing communities, and still creating the profit margin that's needed, but ensuring that society is still taken care of and the environment for sure. Yeah, definitely. So that's a bit about me.
There's like a real social impact piece to what you're
Yeah.
doing. Yeah, I personally love, because you know, I know you're in the UK, so a lot of listeners who are in the US might be saying, well, what's really the synergy to what I'm doing here in the US? But I actually think there's a lot of synergy, because as a multifamily investor, basically what I like to do is to come into communities like you're saying, and again, treat it like people live here. These are residents, and their home and what their surrounding looks like has such an impact on the children who live there, the people who function and live there. And now more than ever, people are even working at home. So it's really something that is of paramount importance. And how can we make that community better? And that's through doing a lot of community things and through a lot of betterments of the physical property and the social aspect that goes into building a community also. So I think that what you're doing really has a lot of applicability across the globe.
Thank you. Yeah, I like to believe so. You know, community is something that we can say is international, you know, like obviously everyone has their different cultures and personalities and different ways of doing things, but firstly, everyone lives and occupies spaces, either it's through work or hospitals or through school. And so where a building is, there's community and there's a collection of people. And so I think that thread is global. So understanding how we impact people through the built environment is firstly very important, but how we can do it more positively is where I think we need to start having a conversation, because like you said, you know, it's so important to really consider the social elements of a building and the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So walk me back. So when you graduated from university, were you immediately drawn to the world of real estate and property? Was that something you said, hey, I want to be in this field? Or did you circuitously come to it?
Well, I studied architecture as an undergrad, only did part one. And then I went to work in Nigeria for just under a year. And while I was working in Nigeria, the way they operate is as architect and project manager. And I couldn't stand doing the drawings. And
right?
So, you know, like the drawings part just was not something I wanted to do. And it's funny because I spent 3 years in doing architecture. I had spent 4 years prior to that, like doing courses that led me to be accepted into the university. Wow. And it got to a point where I was like now sitting there on AutoCAD doing the detailed drawings and counting the number of doors and windows on a development site. I just said, this is not for me. So but what I did learn is that I loved being on site. I loved watching concrete get poured and climbing up scaffolding. And so I came back and said, okay, well, let me see if I can have a career in like the project management side. And actually it just kind of so happened that I think I'm naturally entrepreneurial. And so it went from being just the management of the building to wanting to do front from the beginning right to the end. And that's like understanding how the numbers work on a land and how much we can get on the land, and then getting all the permissions needed to deliver it, and getting the architect to design something that is really considerate and maximizes the potential for the site, and then getting the contractors on board, getting the financing on board, selling off assets that we as developers don't want to hold on to. And so in some instances, it will be the affordable housing or the commercial or the BTR, if that's not something that we do. And so I just kind of like evolved into wanting to know as much as possible about the built environment, but just not wanting to draw it. So yeah.
Well, but it's so great to me to hear this story, because there is such a great lesson, right? First of all, lesson number one is that you should never feel stuck to something or wedded to something that isn't right for you.
Yeah.
Even if you've done it for 4 years, right? Like there's always an opportunity to say, this isn't for me, and I envision myself elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think great lesson, because I think people generally, so it's not just men or women, but I think women tend more to feel like, if I started down a path, I have to continue on this path. Right. So
yeah,
it's harder to like get out of that mindset. So I love that you did that. And then I think the other lesson is that when you free yourself to do something that is more suited to you, doors really do open for you.
Yes.
Right.
I think that point is something I could just like reinforce. Once you stand in your truth, I think, and in your authenticity, things start to happen. And even with Mood and Space, my new development consultancy, so much has happened in the time where I said, I'm going to stand out and say I'm doing this. And I've gotten so much positive response, so much opportunity. And I don't know if I would have met you in the same way if not for the fact that I said I'm going to step out and do something that's slightly different. And people said, oh, you're so brave, why did you do it? And every time I hear that, and I think fine, it might be brave, but actually it feels right. It feels natural to me. And in that moment, I felt like I'll be betraying myself if I didn't do it, if I didn't step out of what was a very comfortable job. So definitely reinforce that fact. Is when you step out, when you do something just that is true to you, so much could happen for you.
I think that really like a number one lesson to teach our children, but to teach ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Because, it is hard to sometimes break free from everything that to start something new. So I definitely commend you. So what do you think the next steps are for Hanna?
Wow. Well, I hope such big questions. No, well, I'm really focusing on Mood and Space and the development consultancy, and I'm focused on identifying how we can embed social value as part of the development process. And I really want to start presenting that back to the industry. So I'm working on a number of research projects at the moment to help really provide that data to back up the premise. I'm working on a number of projects at the moment within London to deliver a range of size residential projects, and working on a couple of proposals to deliver large-scale regen projects also. But the main thing is I'm putting myself out there, and I'm believing in all the successes that will come. And then for Black women in real estate, just continue to watch that grow. For me, it's really important to keep highlighting the Black women and members within our group who are just amazing people who should have been given the opportunity to shine despite their gender, despite their race. And the other thing I'm doing now with Black women in real estate specifically is hosting what I call bold spaces, where it's intimate conversations with senior leaders and CEOs within companies and some of the Black women to humanize the process of DEI and diversity and inclusion, and break down the walls around I don't know any people who are diverse or from ethnic minority backgrounds, and start to remove it as a tick box exercise and a KPI, but actually have conversations with people who have probably had similar life experiences as them. They just have never been given the opportunity to meet along their journeys. And I believe that when we start having those kind of interesting conversations, then we start to really tackle the issues around and obstacles around diversity. So that's something that I'm working on with Black women in real estate. And like I said, with Mood and Space, I'm working on a number of projects already, but I'm excited to keep growing the business and seeking more help. The thing that I didn't think I would need so soon was, to hire people, and that's exciting. That's exciting because it means there's enough work, and I'm looking forward to just kind of continue to grow that space, because this conversation around social value, social impact, and community focused development is so important.
It really is. I'd love if you could give me an example of a social impact that you like to implement, like tangible.
Yeah, so a really great example is on my last, just the project I've just left on the Olympic Park. One of the things that we have done that I think was just extremely impactful was set up a fund for charities. So it was a grant that was provided to local charities within the communities that was to go back into to schools and for young people. And so those charities, they having that access to the funding meant that they can support more people within the community. So it wasn't just the standard funding that they were getting from their typical lines, but it was additional funding that we were providing. The other thing we did was we set up a fund, but it's a multi-million-pound fund for local businesses within the area. And so we had, like, before I left, we had disseminated about 250,000 of that to local small businesses, and it was I guess their fund of last resort. So we had just assumed we weren't going to be getting that back, and that was really important because it meant that we weren't we weren't seeking the same standards as banks, but we were helping businesses who, especially during COVID, were struggling to access funds and stay open. The other thing that we did was we increased the rates. So we have apprentices on our site. So we increased the rates that we were paying apprentices, because the standard rate is quite low. And it meant that a lot of people were struggling either to get to the site to work. But also it meant that we weren't getting people stay on, so the retention was low because people couldn't sustain the salary they were getting. And so increasing that meant that there were more people who were able to stay on, and we were actually able to capture more diverse group of people onto the site and keep them there and continually train them up. And it's really important because some of these people are coming from quite a distance, and they need a good salary to actually to commit to the job and commit to the training. So these are just some of the examples, but the other things that we did, like on that project, we built up a community. We helped relocate a mobile garden. We decorated a community facility. We provided voluntary support. So a lot of the staff members will go into a senior community center. We'll help them with their IT. And then, like, as part of the wider park, there was always events, and so we'll set up a stand, and we'll do we inadvertently teach young people. So when I say young people, I mean like under 5 years old, about the ecosystem of a house. And so they'll be given a little paper to do their colorings, but at the same time we're telling them about solar panels and wind farms. And it was a really great interactive way to meet and speak to the community. So I think these are some of the things that you can do and embed in the process, but I think there's so much more you can do in terms of like long-term engagement with community facilities and employing people local.
Yeah, which actually, even if you're paying more, when the quality of service goes up, you're actually saving money in the long run.
Yeah. So you're saving money, but you also you've committed people then, like, instead of people, you have more, you're more likely to have people stay on your project instead of having a lack of resource around when you pay them well. And they really will, they really do stay loyal.
Yes, they're invested in what you're doing. They care.
Exactly.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Well, you're doing such great work. It's been such a pleasure to have you on and to talk about this. And I think there is such a need for women in real estate, which is the impetus for my podcast, and Black women in real estate. I love that you've really niched down on that, because I think that together we're more powerful when
Definitely.
we care and when we show camaraderie. That's when change really happens. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I think, your podcast is so needed to have these conversations, and I've loved hearing some of the other episodes as well. So yeah, I think what you're doing is great, and I'm so glad we were able to connect.
Yes, absolutely. Tell my guests, please, I'm going to put it in my show notes. Where can they find you?
So for Black Women in Real Estate, you can find us on LinkedIn and on Instagram. For Mood and Space, you could also find us on LinkedIn and Instagram. And like Atara said, you can find me at Hanna Osundina on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
See ya. Bye.